by Senegalese author and expert on African affairs, Adama Gaye, from the Moroccan city of Casablanca. Mr. Gaye, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
My pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
Indeed, it's an absolute pleasure having you this evening, Mr. Gaye. Now, before we get to France's influence over its former colonies, let's talk about why African heads of state were not invited to this event. I mean, what's the significance of that?
Look, let's look at the bigger picture. Mr. Macron has learned and observed that across the Francophone area, from Senegal to Gabon, Chad, Cameroon, you name it, there are people who are challenging the grip of France over their nations, that they consider France as being part of the problems of their countries in terms of democratization, in terms of dictatorship prevailing in these countries, disregard of constitutional rules, and other problems. And also, French companies are literally grabbing the contracts in many of these countries. You name the likes of Bolloré and others, they are winning the contract against any other companies with the help somehow of the rogue leaders that France has managed to maintain in place. So people have been challenging the grip of France, and they are saying that France also is controlling the monetary authority of West African Francophone countries. So they wanted these things to change, and Mr. Macron is a smart person. He understood that he had to do something about it. But on the one hand, even though yesterday and today he tried to engage part of the restless people, he managed to select the people he wanted to talk to, people who are not the most critical against France on the one hand, and on the other hand, he ensured that he has had on May 18 this year a summit with heads of state. Somehow, to a certain extent, the summit of heads of state of France with other leaders has been done. And also, next month, early November, around the 8th or 10th, there will be another summit with other heads of state about security. So France is playing it double game. They need to give some signals to those who are challenging its domination of Francophone countries, the youngsters, but on the other hand, it's maintaining its interest and advantage in the countries, and it is also bringing the international community, the UN, Central European countries and others to support it in its drive to have its military actions continuing in Africa.
Well, it just said that France is now playing double standards, and the country continues to control the trade and the currency of its former colonies. Doesn't the maintenance of economic domination allow the prolongation of political domination?
Of course, that's the clear ambition of France. Recall, after the Berlin Conference in 1884-85, France, like other European countries, came to Africa in a bid to overcome the limitation of its geographical capacity to reach out and attain its objective of imperial power. That's why they came to Africa, in order to take advantage of the natural resources and the geography and the geopolitical support, that the clout that this will bring also. So that's why they came in the first place to Africa. That has been continuing after the Second World War in 1946, when the then French President General de Gaulle understood that France cannot continue to hold sway in these countries because it has had difficulties with its economy, because it has been almost a defeated nation, weakened economically and depending on the Marshall Plan from America, and also under the pressure of, you recall, Churchill and Roosevelt declaration that was adopted in 1943 in Terre-Neuve off the coast of Canada, when it was decided that nations should be allowed to assume their self-determinations. France started to withdraw from Africa in 1946. It created what it called the Constitution Française, the community, that was bringing everybody within under the same umbrella, but France still leading. And progressively, 1956, it gave autonomy to Francophone countries. In 1960s, most of the Francophone countries were free. But France did allow them to be free and independent only on the basis that it will remain the power in charge. There was a colonial pact that was signed. Nobody knows what was in the colonial pact, but we discovered now that France had to control militarily the countries, have military bases in Francophone countries, control the monetary capacity of the nations and the foreign reserves. 50% of the 14 Francophone countries are lodged in the French treasury, and France has been using it as a whim, even lending to Francophone nations. So, to a large extent, France has left Francophone countries without leaving it. It has managed to leave theoretically, but it is controlling everything economically, and progressively, its companies, like I mentioned earlier, are winning the bill. And on the other hand, in terms of security, France is playing a double game. Even in Mali, for instance, it has allowed the country to be literally, Mali to be divided between the north and the south, and part of it, France wants to control it, and using even there some suspected terrorists in order to threaten, to blackmail the French authorities in Bamako. On the other front also, France has not been willing until now to accept the memorial aspect, the memory of its rule in the colonial era. That's why Algeria has become very adamant to fight it, because France also wants always to, the leader in France, in this case it's Macron, they have to show to the electorate, because they don't forget that in April next year, there will be a presidential election, and it will be decided against immigration, against France's military operation in Mali and in the Sahel, the terrorist action going on in Europe, including in France. These problems, Mr. Macron has to show some signal. This signal, on the one hand, is open to a diaspora of young Africans who own and hold the French nationality. But on the other hand, he has to try to please the right wing of French electorate, who would be making really the outcome of the next presidential election in France come April 2022.
Mr. Gaye, let's talk about the redeployment of French capitalism resulting mainly from oil issues, in particular Angola and Nigeria. We know that Total, which is the French multinational group, has already accounted for about 28% of the oil and gas production here on the African continent. But then seemingly it wants to have a presence in the larger markets, for instance South Africa, and not necessarily on those French-speaking countries in Africa.
Indeed, that's a shift, that is geopolitical shift on the African continent that is happening indeed. If you listen to French radio, Radio France Internationale, you can hear that it is more covering now that part of Africa, Anglophone Africa, Lusophone Africa, Portuguese-speaking countries like South Africa, like Angola, and even DRC, which is considered as a major market, and Ethiopia. So it is reducing its exposure to a smaller market like the Francophone countries, where it still has its control, but it realizes that the future of Africa will be decided somehow to other parts of the continent. So Total has been an arm of the French government forever. But it's not alone. Other French companies have always benefited from the support of the French government, and that's why France is meddling its hand in all politics of Francophone and African countries overall, even the African Union, even ECOWAS. Most of the places are influenced by French intelligence, and they are now trying to use the type of Africans, like I call...
Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time, Mr. Adama Gaye. Thank you so much for your thoughts and for your reflections on this matter. We do appreciate your time. That was Mr. Adama Gaye, a Senegalese author and expert on African affairs, speaking to us live via Zoom. This is the Globe on SABC News. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment.